Angel Reese appeared to think she had the moment. The crowd reacted to it, the cameras captured it, and social media reacted immediately, and for a few seconds it looked like another chapter was being added to one of the most discussed rivalries in sports. Then attention shifted in a direction few were watching for, because while most eyes were on Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham was paying close attention, and once Fever fans recognized what had happened, the conversation shifted accordingly. The Indiana Fever and Atlanta Dream matchup was already considered one of the most anticipated games of the week. Whenever Caitlin Clark takes the court, people pay attention. Every possession becomes a talking point, every foul becomes a point of debate, and every reaction tends to circulate as a clip. That is simply the reality of being the most discussed figure in women's basketball right now. Whether people support her or grow tired of the attention she draws, they continue to watch, and that means every opponent understands that the spotlight will be there waiting. Against Atlanta, the intensity was present from the opening tip. The Dream were not interested in making things easy, playing physically, challenging every catch, and making Clark work for every inch of space. This is not a new approach. It has become one of the more common storylines across the WNBA this season, as teams that cannot fully contain Clark's talent have instead tried to disrupt her rhythm. The reasoning is straightforward. If a team cannot stop her outright, the next option is to make the game uncomfortable for her, and Atlanta was not afraid to test that approach. Throughout the game, the physical contact was constant. Possessions turned into battles, rebounds were contested, and drives were crowded. But what drew the attention of fans was not only the physicality of the game, it was the reactions, the emotion, and the smaller moments that happen between plays, because that is often where rivalries are most visible, not in the box score or the final result, but in the moments where players send a message to one another. That is why social media reacted so quickly. At one point during the game, Angel Reese appeared to celebrate following a sequence involving Clark. Depending on perspective, it read either as harmless competitive energy or as a more deliberate gesture aimed at Clark. Fans split into opposing camps almost immediately. Some viewed Reese as simply enjoying the moment, while others viewed it as a more pointed message. Within minutes, clips were circulating across platforms, and once that happens, the conversation tends to escalate the way it usually does online, with a single moment expanding into a wider dispute. Opinions formed quickly, theories multiplied, and people aligned with one side or the other. But while fans were arguing online, a separate storyline was developing on the court involving Sophie Cunningham. Cunningham has become one of the more compelling figures in the league this season, not because she consistently leads the team in scoring or produces highlight reel plays, but because she brings something that nearly every team values: attitude, energy, confidence, and a clear sense of loyalty to her teammates. Fever fans have noticed this throughout the year. When situations become heated, Cunningham tends to be nearby. When opponents push the limits of physical play, she takes notice. When teammates need support, she shows up. It has become part of how she is recognized around the league, and it is why fans connected her so quickly to this situation. Even before any clip circulated widely, there was already a general sense among fans that if someone directed a gesture at Clark, Cunningham was unlikely to let it pass without a response. That reputation has been built not through interviews or social media statements, but through her actions on the court. What stands out about Cunningham is that she has never needed to make any kind of public declaration about her role. She does not need to announce her intentions. Fans simply watch the games and draw their own conclusions. She competes hard, she looks out for her teammates, and she does not shy away from confrontation when it arises. In the current sports landscape, audiences tend to respond well to players who are not afraid of conflict, particularly when those players are seen as standing up for their team. That is part of why the reaction to this moment was so immediate. Once people connected Reese's gesture with Cunningham's presence on the floor, the story took on its own momentum. Fans began posting screenshots, slow-motion clips, and reaction videos, along with a wide range of commentary, breaking down every facial expression and interaction they could find. Before long, the conversation had moved beyond Clark alone and circled back, once again, to Sophie Cunningham. This is not the first time this season that attention drawn by Clark has ultimately redirected toward Cunningham. That pattern is not accidental. Audiences tend to gravitate toward distinct personalities, and Cunningham has one of the more recognizable personalities in the league. She is emotional, competitive, and unafraid, the kind of player who would rather be directly involved in a moment than removed from it. Fans respect that quality, and even those critical of her acknowledge that she is consistent in where she stands. In an environment where many athletes are careful with their words and reactions, that level of directness tends to resonate with audiences. The game itself also featured plenty of basketball worth discussing on its own merits. Clark delivered another strong performance, showing the shot-making ability that has defined her game, creating offense, attacking the basket, and competing at a high level throughout. The statistics again reflected why opposing defenses devote so much attention to limiting her. Yet even in games where she plays well, the broader conversation often shifts elsewhere. That is one of the recurring patterns of modern sports coverage. The most discussed storyline is not always tied directly to the statistical outcome of the game. Sometimes it is shaped by what happens emotionally between players. The Fever have become one of the most closely watched teams in basketball, not solely because of wins or losses, but because nearly every game functions as part of a larger ongoing narrative. Each matchup carries storylines, each interaction generates discussion, and each rivalry adds to overall engagement around the team. The dynamic between Clark and Reese has been fueling discussion for years, dating back well before either reached the professional level. Fans have spent years comparing the two, debating their respective styles, defending their preferred player, and at times criticizing the other. Every matchup between them carries that accumulated history, and history tends to generate emotion. That is why even relatively small moments can expand into much larger stories. People are not simply reacting to a single play in isolation, but to everything that has come before it. Past headlines, past debates, past arguments, and past viral moments all resurfacing at once. That dynamic played out clearly here. A single reaction quickly became part of a much broader conversation. One side of the debate held that Reese was simply embracing competitive energy. The other side argued that the gesture was intended to embarrass Clark. Meanwhile, another segment of fans focused specifically on how Sophie Cunningham responded, and before long the basketball game itself had become almost secondary to the surrounding discussion. That may seem like an exaggeration, but it reflects the reality of how sports content circulates in 2026. Fans are no longer simply watching games in isolation. They are following storylines, personalities, and relationships between players, and the Fever may be the most storyline-driven team in the league at the moment. Part of what makes Cunningham significant to this team is that she provides something many rosters lack: an edge. Not necessarily elite talent, shooting, or athleticism, but a clear willingness to step into uncomfortable moments, confront opponents directly, and defend teammates when needed. Throughout sports history, successful teams have typically included players willing to take on that role, refusing to let teammates face difficult moments alone. Fans tend to notice those players quickly, which helps explain why Cunningham's popularity has continued to grow. People know what to expect from her. She is not attempting to remain neutral or stay in the background. She competes directly, and regardless of whether that style is universally appreciated, it consistently draws attention. The reaction following the Dream Game reflected that pattern. Thousands of comments followed the broadcast, many focused specifically on Cunningham. Some fans described her as an ideal teammate, while others suggested she has become one of the emotional leaders of the Fever roster. A number of fans argued that every star player benefits from having a teammate like Cunningham nearby, someone willing to take on the less visible responsibilities, absorb criticism when necessary, and manage on-court conflict directly. This dynamic has precedent throughout sports history. Star players are often paired, intentionally or not, with teammates who take on a protective role, not in a literal sense, but in establishing boundaries and signaling to opponents that there will be resistance to overly physical or provocative play. Fans frequently associate these players with toughness, and toughness remains one of the more widely respected traits in competitive sports. The Fever appear to understand this dynamic well. The roster is still developing, still adjusting, and still finding its long-term identity, but the chemistry among players has been visible throughout the season, both during games and in how players support one another's individual success. This matters because the level of attention surrounding Clark shows no sign of decreasing, and if anything continues to grow. Every opposing team understands that television cameras and social media attention will be present whenever Clark is on the floor, and that any notable moment involving her will spread quickly. That creates pressure, and pressure tends to produce emotional moments, which brings the discussion back to Reese. Whether her intent was to mock Clark or simply to celebrate competitively becomes almost secondary once the moment reaches social media, where perception often becomes the dominant reality. People interpret the same clip differently depending on their existing allegiances. Supporters defend the player they favor, critics target the opposing player, and the cycle continues from there. That is exactly what unfolded following this game. Within hours, a wide range of posts appeared across platforms. Some accused Reese of disrespecting Clark. Others argued that Clark's supporters were overreacting to a minor moment, and still others centered their attention entirely on Cunningham's role in the exchange. Each group approached the moment from a different angle, which is part of why this particular rivalry continues to generate sustained attention. It rarely stays simple. Each interaction tends to add another layer, each reaction tends to spark new debate, and each game tends to produce additional storylines. For content creators, that environment generates significant material. For fans, it remains a continuous source of engagement. For the players themselves, it is likely exhausting, yet they continue competing, continue showing up, and continue adding new chapters to an ongoing narrative. One of the more notable developments this season has been the shift in how Fever fans view Cunningham specifically. Early in the season, many fans viewed her primarily as a role player, a useful veteran presence without much beyond that. Over time, that perception shifted considerably. The more fans watched her play, the more they came to value what she contributes. Energy, emotional intensity, and confidence, qualities that do not always show up clearly in a box score, but matter significantly in high-pressure moments, particularly when emotions are elevated or opponents are attempting to establish physical control of a game. That is precisely the kind of moment in which a player like Cunningham becomes especially valuable, since she does not appear to be uncomfortable in those situations, and, if anything, seems to embrace them. The Fever's overall rise in visibility has also shifted expectations around the team. They are no longer treated as a secondary storyline within the league. Opponents prepare for them seriously, media coverage has increased substantially, and fans analyze nearly every game in detail. That level of attention creates opportunity for the organization, but it also brings added scrutiny. Every reaction tends to be magnified, every mistake draws criticism, and every controversy spreads quickly. The Dream Game served as another example of that pattern. A moment that might have gone largely unnoticed a few seasons ago became a significant topic of national conversation. That is part of what has been described as the broader effect Clark has had on the league's visibility, and everyone connected to the Fever, including Cunningham, experiences that effect in some form. Cunningham's own visibility has grown in part because of her proximity to these moments. Fans increasingly see her as someone willing to stand firm, push back when necessary, and defend her teammates directly. Whether that characterization is entirely accurate in every instance is somewhat beside the point, since perception plays a significant role in shaping reputation, and her reputation has continued to build throughout the season. Meanwhile, Clark continues doing what she has done throughout her career, playing basketball, scoring points, creating plays, and managing a level of public attention that would be difficult for many athletes to handle. It is easy to overlook how unusual her overall situation is. Most players entering professional sports do not face this degree of scrutiny, do not generate headlines after nearly every game, and do not inspire ongoing debate among fans and media on a near-weekly basis. Clark does, and that means everyone connected to her, including Cunningham, Reese, and every opponent she faces, becomes part of the broader story in some way. What these storylines tend to reveal is what fans actually value beyond statistics. Many fans are not solely interested in points and rebounds. They also pay attention to loyalty, competitiveness, toughness, and how teammates support one another. That helps explain why the Cunningham angle resonated as strongly as it did. Fans tend to respond positively when they see teammates standing together, a theme that has remained consistent throughout the history of competitive sports. Concepts like unity, trust, protection, and sacrifice tend to connect with audiences because they extend beyond the sport itself into something more broadly understood and respected. When fans believe they are witnessing those qualities play out in real time, the emotional response tends to be stronger, and that is largely what occurred here. The conversation expanded well beyond a single play into a broader discussion involving team identity, rivalry, loyalty, respect, and competition. And once those themes enter the conversation, engagement tends to increase significantly. Looking ahead, this is unlikely to be the final chapter in any of these ongoing storylines. The dynamic between Clark and Reese shows no signs of fading, the Fever's overall popularity continues to grow, and Cunningham's visibility within that storyline is unlikely to decrease. If anything, all three elements appear to be gaining momentum, which suggests future matchups will carry even more anticipation. Fans will continue watching closely, media coverage will continue to analyze these dynamics in detail, and social media reactions will likely remain immediate. That is simply the current environment surrounding the league. The WNBA's overall attention continues to increase, rivalries continue to expand, and player personalities continue to become more recognizable to a broader audience, and games like this help explain why that is happening. People are engaged enough to debate nearly every moment, defend the players they support, and spend considerable time discussing a single reaction. That level of engagement is generally considered a positive sign for the league's continued growth, since attention, passion, and investment from fans tend to support that growth over time. The Fever and Dream Game gave fans another contest to analyze. Reese gave fans another moment to interpret. Clark gave fans another performance to discuss. And Cunningham gave fans another reason to view her as one of the more significant personalities on the Fever roster this season. Regardless of which interpretation of the moment fans ultimately accept, one point remains difficult to dispute. People are talking about it, and in sports, sustained conversation is typically one of the clearest indicators that a moment matters to the audience watching it. The next game will likely bring its own storyline, its own debate, and its own viral moment for fans to react to and divide over. But for now, the central takeaway from this particular matchup is fairly direct. Reese may have captured the initial reaction, and Clark may have remained the central figure throughout the broadcast. But by the time the broader conversation had run its course, much of the discussion had shifted towards Sophie Cunningham. Based on the reaction across social media, that shift did not appear to be incidental. It served as another indication that when emotions rise during a game, when rivalries intensify, and when teammates visibly stand together, the resulting story often extends well beyond the final score, which helps explain why audiences continue to follow it as closely as they do.